Someone said to me the other day, "Oh, I really want to get into James Joyce, but I feel so daunted to pick up Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, and is there another way into James Joyce?" And that got me thinking about how to access these very consequential writers with massive reputations and sort of a lot of cultural weight behind their names, behind the ideas that they brought to fruition, the paradigm shifting implications of their works on our culture. And I thought, oh, what is a kind of gateway into James Joyce? And then I decided to just actually think about several writers of that ilk, that are almost in the realm of hagiography, writers that are so respected, adored, worshipped even, but also have a sense of trepidation and can be quite anxiety-inducing because they are sometimes dense, opaque, challenging, unsettling, or disruptive in the kind of interface between the text and the reader and the reading experience. A lot of these writers have minor works that are valuable in and of themselves. And one of the values of these so-called lesser works is that they can be access points as a doorway, as an entry into the wider oeuvre of a particular author, should one just dive straight into the depths and plumb the deepest subterranean vaults and chasms, or is it okay to find your way in through highways and byways? So let's dive into this list. I've got 10 here. So yeah, first up, James Joyce. Obviously we have the gargantuan Ulysses, and then the ineffable, irreducible, nightmarish, garrulous monstrosity that is Finnegan's Wake. James Joyce does have smaller, lesser works. Now, of course, we have his classic collection, Dubliners, and his first novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. But actually, you can even go to a more micro scale, and there are some even smaller works that aren't really talked about much, but are worth investigating. And I've got here the collected poems of James Joyce. As you can see, he didn't spend an awful lot of time writing conventional poems, but this is a small collection of 63 pages, and it's surprisingly touching. In many ways, there is a conventionality to a lot of these poems that is quite striking in juxtaposition with the high experimental, modernistic stream of consciousness of Joyce's fiction. But there are some really beautiful moments, and it can just be that entryway that you need into thinking, Joyce is just a human being. So I'm going to read you Night Piece. It's one of my favorite poems, actually. It's got one of my favorite lines. Gaunt in gloom, the pale stars their torches enshrouded wave. Ghost fires from heaven's far verges faint illume. Arches on soaring arches, night's sin-dark nave, seraphim, the lost hosts awaken to service till, in moonless gloom, each lapse is muted, dim, raised when she has, and shaken her thurible. And long and loud to night's nave upsoaring, a stark knell tolls as the bleak incense surges, cloud on cloud, voidward from the adoring waste of souls. Isn't that stunning? Next, I've got a book by Toni Morrison, a short book called Recitative. Now, this is something that I don't hear talked about all that much, but it is a very interesting story formally, kind of experiment in which Toni Morrison, so known for her theme of race, really sort of bites back to the critics that sort of reduce her work to that schema instead of the vast tapestry of riches and philosophical depth that she actually bequeaths on the world in her work. And in this story, she purposefully leaves out all of the markers of race. So the two main characters, two young girls, are intentionally ambiguous in racial profiling.
And it's just a really short little thing with a great introduction by Zadie Smith, and it's a good gateway into Toni Morrison. And then you can always climb into her major novels such as Beloved and Song of Solomon and A Mercy and Home and Jazz. She has a really wide-ranging body of work.
Next, I've got Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol. This is actually, I'm not actually going to talk about the Christmas Carol because you guys all know and love that text, and for good reason. But this vintage edition has actually 3 of his Christmas novellas. He actually wrote 5 or 6 in total Christmas novellas in a series of years, sort of around the mid 1840s. And they were very, very popular at the time, very commercially successful. And of course, we know and love A Christmas Carol. In fact, some people say that Charles Dickens really invented Christmas as we know it through his Christmas writings. You know, Dickens has these big novels, David Copperfield, The Pickwick Papers, Bleak House is around 1,000 pages. These are all pretty sizable novels, and maybe you think, gosh, I want to read Dickens, but his main works are just so expansive and maximalist. I wanted to tell you about one of his lesser-known Christmas novellas, and that is The Chimes. And it is so gorgeously succinct and tender and also spooky and spectral in a way. Also a little bit on the sentimental side, but if anyone can get away with being sentimental, in my opinion, it's Charles Dickens. There's always a little bit of melodrama sprinkled in. But The Chimes is a story about a poor porter and his destitute daughter who cares for him and brings him some food to eat, and they get ridiculed by these pompous, gentry. And it's obviously around Christmas time, Christmas Eve. This porter's in ill health and he's quite old already, and he has this dream in which he is climbing up this church tower and standing among the bells, and there are all of these spirits and goblins flying around him, about him, and he has this vision of his future, of his daughter's future, and there are just a series of misfortunes that are unraveling, and it gets more and more dire and bleak and heart-wrenching, and it is so excruciatingly deplorable, the situation she finds herself in, and I don't want to give it away. And I also don't want to give away the ending. I mean, it's a Christmas story, so you can imagine that it's not a story of annihilation and devastation and death and unmitigated suffering. It's not what it's about. But he takes you down this road in which you're so desperate for kindness, you're so desperate for a bit of good luck, and he just evokes this world in which, there are always rays of light, even amidst the most seemingly hopeless situations. And I really love The Chimes. It's a good entry point into Charles Dickens. Right, then I've got this little penguin mini of George Orwell, pages from a Scullion's diary. Now, many of us had to read Orwell at school, in 1984. And Animal Farm, they're both not incredibly long works, but Orwell also wrote a lot of non-fiction and political analysis and commentary and criticism, and he was very combative and quite polemical at times even. But if you're feeling like, I should know more of Orwell, I should read more of Orwell, or if you were maybe put out by 1984 because you had to do homework assignments on it, then I would recommend this little guy. So Pages from a Scullion's Diary is an excerpt from his first book that he published, Down and Out in Paris and London, which is a fantastic text in itself, very funny and gritty and visceral, and it's this kind of sensory blast of bad smells and dirt and grime, because he's a young man working in Paris, working in hotel kitchens and in the kind of basements, scrubbing dirty dishes and laundry and all of the squalor of Paris in the 1920s. It's really, really entertaining and revealing, shocking at times. But Pages from a Scullion's Diary is an excerpt of that. So it's just 50 odd pages, but I think it gives a real taste of Orwell's unfettered honesty, his brazen sense of looking life in the face and confronting inequality and suffering and squalor, but without condescension, without being like pitying, you know. Then I've got Sylvia Plath. Now, many of us have, of course, read some of her poems and her one novel, The Bell Jar, but Sylvia Plath also has massive collections of journals and letters and, you know, a lot of poetry. Her collected poems, you know, span several hundred pages. So, and she is very, very dark and brooding and moody and haunted, menaced. There's a menaced atmosphere to Plath's, but it's a real dark music. It's stunning and sobering, but at the same time quite mesmerizing and intoxicating, if that makes sense. Can something be sobering and intoxicating? There are moments of somberness and soberness, but also real elevated flights and transcendent moments of sublime intoxication on language and imagery. She's not the most transparent in her style and in the tone and voice and imagistic, impressionistic, serpentine twisting and winding of her poetry especially. So you're looking for a bit of Plath, but you really want a softer entry point. She wrote some great children's classics. The It Doesn't Matter suit. This is such a charming story with lovely illustrations by Bertraud Suzanne Berner. But it's the story of a family, of a boy named Max and of his family. He's got a whole bunch of older brothers, I think 7 older brothers. And he lives with Papa Nix and Mama Nix in a small village called Winkelberg in Austria. This mysterious package arrives in the mail and they open it around the breakfast table, the family, and it's this like really cool yellow sort of funky suit. You know, it's about finding yourself, finding your own sense of identity, your own sense of belonging, and it's really fun and charming. I can't wait to read it to my little boy, and yeah, it's just a rollick. It's quite understandable to be daunted by Tolstoy, you know. Anna Karenina, and then even more so War and Peace, these two monumental, mountainous, gargantuan, you know, megalodons of literary fiction that have just transfigured and transformed the landscape of fiction writing and of human expression in the arts, really. And they're very serious and deep and philosophical and also very, very searing in their emotions and woundedness of human interactions and human beings. But there are softer, smaller, more accessible, less daunting entry points into Tolstoy. And there are several, for example, Master and Man is one of the best short stories ever written. It's quite a long story, almost sort of in that liminal space between a long story and a novella. I have it in sort of various editions, but not in a standalone edition. So that's why I just thought I would show you The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I've got another little back classic here. Phenomenal short story. This one also includes another story called 3 Deaths, and they are just pitch perfect. Every brushstroke is so dexterous and so finely wrought. Magisterial in how, you know, in an elliptical short story, right? There's so much left out, but yet what is contained, the universe that is contained within these meager, you know, handful of pages is astounding. It's really, really astonishing, and it's a great entryway into Tolstoy because it does speak to his wider themes of suffering and sacrifice and penitence and guilt and complicity and hope and hopelessness, and this dark, you know, winterscape of you know, swirling snow and, you know, bleak, barren, icy landscapes, and, you know, country peasants, and, you know, all of the, you know, the elements that make up you know, these scenes from provincial Russian 19th century life. Then I've got Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Bon Voyage, Mr. President, and Other Stories. This one has just got Four stories in it. Light is Like Water, I Only Came to Use the Phone, Sleeping Beauty on the Airplane, and Bon Voyage, Mr. President. All four of these are really superb, really, really gorgeous and vivid and lyrical. You know, of course, 100 Years of Solitude is his most well-known masterpiece, and Love in a Time of Cholera. There are others as well, but this is just 40, 50 odd pages of really, really masterful short story writing, and it's a good entry point into Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Next, I've got Virginia Woolf. This is Monday or Tuesday, 8 stories. I've actually talked about this in my whole video on Virginia Woolf and several of her books, so I will leave a link to that one as well if you want to see me go more in depth on Virginia Woolf. She is known for her impressionistic, nebulous, floaty, drifty style that is quite challenging. It's not run-of-the-mill, it's not so plot-driven, so her major works in that sense can certainly have barriers, especially something like The Waves is her most lyrical and poetic. I mean, I love Virginia Woolf and I think that anyone can appreciate her, but sometimes you just want some kind of slightly smoother entryway, and these stories are just exceptionally good and underrated, I think, and certainly understated. Then I've got Albert Camus, Summer. It's another one of these little penguin little minis, and you know, Camus obviously is a very influential existential philosopher who wrote very good fiction. The Outsider, L'Étranger, The Plague, La Peste. I actually think his fiction is better than his non-fiction philosophizing, to be honest. But Summer is something a little bit in between. It's a collection of 8 essays. It's actually early work. It's early Camus. He was really, really a young and precocious writer when he wrote these stories, reflecting on his upbringing in Algeria, on the immense sunlight and the beaches and bronzed bodies and the sensuousness of that Mediterranean existence, and the impact that had on his development and on his love of life and of, you could even say hedonistic, but certainly his love of pleasure and of enjoyment and of physical well-being, the capaciousness of sea and sky, and they're very atmospheric short pieces. So it's a good entryway into Camus. It's a really nice summary read. And next I've got Emily Dickinson, Selected Poems. Now, her masterpiece is really the collected complete poems of Emily Dickinson, and there are many, many, many. I mean, possibly more than 1,000 individual poems. There is an abstruse slantedness to her poetry, which can be quite infuriating at times. Again, that sense of access denied, that sense of the unsaid, of the inadvertent, of the small details that sort of augment and amplify meaning, but in sort of indirect channel of power and resonance is something that Dickinson is so adept at. But to just pick up this massive, beefy, complete poems is really quite a large step to make. So I would recommend there's many different short selections, and I think it's a good entree into her work. There is a kind of a brittle heaven to her work, to quote from the Goal, and her themes of death and loneliness and hope and faith are so crystallized in these small but very effective, punchy poems. So check out a selected poems of Emily Dickinson. Next, I've actually got 2 here from Franz Kafka. Now his major works being The Trial and Metamorphosis and Other Stories, of course, and The Castle. Now, none of these are like 600-page megatomes like we have with Dickens or with Tolstoy, but still Kafka is very difficult. He is unsettling, nightmarish, the Kafkaesque, right? The uncanniness and the strange atmospherics anxiety and doubt and destabilizing shadows. It's disconcerting to read Kafka, and there's a kind of cosmic despair in a way in Kafka. You know, you think of the trial and this like endless labyrinthine bureaucracy that you just can't get to some kind of denouement. You can't get to some kind of closure, or there's just this hovering guilt, this massive weight of guilt, and it's not light reading, you know. There's a real atmosphere of sorrow and anguish and despair and anxiety. There's also humor in Kafka, but it's really heavy going. And so if you're looking for a shorter entry point, I've got two here. I've got Letter to Father or Letter to My Father, depending on how it's translated. This is a short text. It's a real letter that he wrote to his father, and this lovely edition from Vitalis actually has, like, you know, his original script included there. It's a very scathing indictment of his father's role in bringing Kafka, Franz and his siblings up, and on the kind of Philistine, uncouth boorishness of his father. There's a kind of incandescence that churns and charges you forward. And then if you do want to read his fiction, there's lots of variations of his stories. Like, you know, I've talked about his collected stories before, but that is also quite a hefty you know, doorstopper of stories. So you could go for something like A Country Doctor and other stories. And most of these are not very long, because he does have some very long and laborsome stories, which can be quite infuriating, intentionally so. But A Country Doctor is, I think, one of his masterpieces. Very, very, very surreal and disturbing story of this wound that is some kind of psychic wound, basically, and speaks to the kind of the psychic ills of the world we live in. Those were my gateway classics into major authors. Let me know if you have alternative suggestions into these authors or into other big authors. You know, you guys really have some absolutely superlative suggestions that you throw out onto this channel, and I get loads of recommendations from you guys, and I know other people do too. That's what's so great about this community. So throw out suggestions for gateway works into major authors. Let's spread this idea around a bit. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and see you all soon.